Hey, have you ever traveled to a country where you were a minority or stepped into a room full of people where no one looks like you? It's odd to look around and not see a reflection of yourself, isn't it? Now imagine that every day of your childhood is like that. So it was for our guest today, and there is much to be learned from his experience. Welcome to the Perpetual mOetion podcast, where curiosity meets career excellence. I'm Dr. Mo Anderson, and I invite you to join me on a journey of personal growth. In each weekly episode, we dive into inspiring and often hilarious conversations with global experts. From communication mastery to relationships to wise investments, we've got you covered. My guest today, JD Mass, is a white man, very white, who grew up in a Black community, very Black, in St. Louis. In fact, one of his childhood friends is Nelly, the rapper and actor best known for his hit, Is Getting Hot in Here, which leads me to believe he might have been in Texas in July, which is where I am. JD's upbringing inspired him to become an activist, entrepreneur, podcast host, and author, dedicating his life to achieving an equitable society. He's been on a lifelong journey to understand the roots of racism and work towards a more equitable world. With a doctorate in organizational psychology, JD created 7 steps to healing the harms of our culture. Today, we're discussing the impact of racism, healing, and why our competitive nature is a problem.
You can't say Dr. Mo ain't tell ya that fear magnifies the consequences of failure. What are you scared of? Why are you afraid?
Welcome, JD.
Thank you for having me. What an introduction. I love it.
Well, I read it just like you wrote it. No, just teasing. He did not write that. I could have gone on. He has a lot of accolades and achievements, and I just love your mission. I'm all aboard. We are very aligned in that regard for a more equitable society.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with what I said in the intro. How was it for you growing up in a Black community, and how did that even come about?
Well, my parents purposely wanted to raise their children in and around Black community. Why? For them, whether it was on my mother's side, interactions and the family love that she received from her family was wealthy enough where they had a housekeeper and a gardener, and she actually, her brothers and sisters had tremendous love and received that love from them, and saw a shift in her parents just due to the interactions with the family that they had. And my dad just had this kind of lifelong path for justice, and it was his desire to raise his children in a different manner in which he was raised, with access to other communities. And so for me growing up, as you mentioned, there were times when I would be at, whether it was nightclubs, skating rinks, even parts of the cafeteria or whatnot, or just sitting around in other people's houses with 20 to 30 friends, and I would be the only less melanated folk there. And so it was, I didn't think much of it until, sometimes I walk by the mirror and recognize, oh yeah, I do look different than everybody else. So
that's a really good point that you just made. And I do look different than everybody else. And you have to pass a mirror to see it. Because I grew up in integrated schools, but I went to Baylor when I graduated from high school. And at that time, Baylor University in Waco had about 100 Black students out of 11,000 students. Wow. And I really could go almost all day and not see anyone who looked like me. And I was so conscious of it initially, but after a while, and a lot of it is just the way people treat you. Some people just keep reminding you, you're not like us.
Right.
As K-Dot said. But because we had a common goal and shared values. Sometimes I would forget, and I love my culture. I embrace my culture, but it just didn't have to be on the forefront of my mind all the time.
Right.
So kudos to your parents, because with that, background in those resources, there are a lot of directions they could have gone. So I'm glad they chose the path they chose. And we're just going to ask real quickly about Nelly, because folks will be mad at me if I don't ask how you came to know the famous actor and rapper Nelly. Can you share that?
So I grew up in the greatest place on earth called University City. And around the 7th grade, Nelly moved into our neighborhood. And I would say so my best friend and I met when I was 4 years old. And basically, most of my friends came through him and his older brother. And they would bring them around or bring me around them. And so as time went on, especially because Shondo played a lot of sports, he and Nelly started to meet on the basketball court, and he would bring Nelly over to my house. And around the 9th grade summer, going into the 9th grade, was when we kind of made it a consistent hangout thing. And so through high school and up through about 2004, we were best of friends.
That's pretty cool. Pretty cool. Now you're a writer. Did you help him with his bars or beats or anything? Or
No, he and I had plenty of spirited conversations about just facing our fears and going out and being the best versions of ourselves and trying to, do whatever we can. I was entrepreneurial, and he was the most talented person in our school on almost anything you wanted to be great at, whether it was dancing, skating, basketball, baseball, football, whatever, singing. If you want to be the best in our school, you were going to be up against Nelly in some kind of capacity.
Wow. That's pretty cool to hear. And I can see that in who and how he is now. He is an activist, clearly has a heart for community, but also I've seen him hoop in some of those celebrity tournaments. He's got to look at.
We thought he'd be our St. Louis Cardinals shortstop in baseball, hands down. He was doing everything from the backflips that Ozzie Smith did when we were growing up so he and I would go to baseball games and buy the cheapest tickets and sneak our way down to behind the dugout by the end of the game.
Of course, but those got to be some great memories for you.
Yeah.
Well, let's bring it up to present day. You shared with me when we spoke before, JD, that our obsession, our societies, and I think in Western culture, but it could be in other places, that we are obsessed with competition. And that's a problem, that mindset. Why so?
Baked into the cake, right? So we come, and I'm speaking now just to less melanated folks, how we got there. I don't want to necessarily go through that path or argument whether or not we were born with less melanin in our skin and moved up to these northern regions, or whether through the path of coming from, the Central African area towards a northern region, we developed less melanin in our skin because there was less sun up there. But for whatever reason, it's hard to dispute that Europe, especially 500-600 years ago, where the people with less melanated skin really occupied. And in that area, there's less resources. There's less sun. Of course, we can't be out in the sun as long, so that makes sense. But there's less natural resources. And if you look at history, we had to go places. We had to go to India for spices. We were in search of India when we, discovered America, where all these other folks were living already.
And I like the air quotes on discovered, because that's exactly how I feel about it. Yeah.
And so, as we would go into these, so the fact that we had to go to these places and the fact that we had less resources developed three things in my mind. One is a scarcity mentality. So I'm holding up for your listeners that can't see a bottle of water. And Dr. Mo, if you and I only thought that this was the amount of water that existed on the planet, we'd probably start a competition amongst ourselves, right? Because we both need these resources. The earth provides us everything our body needs. And so if we're in this region, we don't have cell phones and and planes and automobiles and trains at this time to go travel to get these resources quickly. We have a scarcity. So every sip that I take means a sip that you don't get. And so it starts this zero-sum mentality. And from that starts a level of competition. Well, I need to start looking out for myself, right? Put my oxygen mask on first, and all of these mentalities come in. So we got individualism stemmed through this competition idea that you and I are now competing for these resources. And if you look at our economic structures, first day of class in econ in college was there's a scarcity of resources on the planet, and we are in competition to control those resources. Immediately, we don't see people in our industry and when you write a business plan, who are your competitors has to be discussed. We don't see each other as being part of something that we can all just share in. We see each other as competitors. And it stems from a scarcity mentality. Going to Africa and other places, like even coming here, if you look at Christopher Columbus's stories, there was more than enough. We shared. They were willing to share, is what Christopher Columbus said, and we can take advantage of this. So I don't know if you've ever wanted something so badly that you have in your mind how you need to get it, and you don't even realize that it's being offered to you, or you can get it in a different way. You're just stuck in that mode. And for me, for us less melanated folks, I kind of just want us to go. We don't have to think of our skin tone as being evil or leading to evil, but our practices did. Our practices of competition led us to want to, win, right? And winning can either mean I'm going to try and do my best, or I'm going to try and stop you from having the same ability to win. And so if we could just go back and give ourselves a hug of 500 years ago, tell us we're okay, we're worthy of just receiving these things, we can just share this planet a lot better than we could do just, trying to control it and win the battle, so to speak. And hence the term race and racism.
Absolutely. Wow, you make a good point as you were sharing, about this mindset and scarcity. I thought about the indigenous people of Australia and the Native Americans who were here when Columbus stumbled upon America, and Africa, where they had the Ubuntu. All of those cultures really think in terms of community, and we all rise together. And we've gotten away from that.
Yeah.
We have gotten way back into this Marie Antoinette kind of mindset of that's a you problem.
If you look at even how, on the flip side, how Europeans conquer, it's often or even today, right, to try and control a narrative, we create a scarcity amongst, Black communities, right? We take our resources, we move away, we try to control things so that there's a scarcity, from Jim Crow to even the way things are set up now in inner cities and whatnot. It's a level of scarcity thinking. It creates a level of hopelessness. We know what it creates. We know what it does for us. And so when I start to hear like this is the Black culture type things, whether it's from Black folks saying we need to heal or from white folks trying to paint a narrative, it's actually not. And it's really harmful that we don't know the difference between what other cultures are and what our culture is. To paint this picture, it's actually much more our culture, and we've just designed this specifically to control a narrative.
Right. And then for some, particularly in politics and other arenas where they have power, to then pretend like this just happened, that it wasn't by design, from gerrymandering and the other things that you mentioned, food deserts and so forth. But I really like your approach and your attempt to change the mindset of people who've fallen into this way of thinking, just because of hearing it and learning it and being brought up that way.
Mm-hmm.
As you were holding up the bottle of water and talking about, you having it and me not having it, or vice versa, it made me think about the other interesting thing you shared with me about prestige, because at that point, whoever has the water now has something that they made very valuable, even though there's unlimited amounts of water. And now we introduce the element of prestige, but that word doesn't mean, as it turns out, what I thought it means. Can you share with us about the word prestige?
Sure. So I was in around 2008, the movie, or 2006, somewhere around there, the movie The Prestige came out. And Hugh Jackman was in it, and it was about a magic show. And at this time in my life, I was heavily involved in an African Hebrew Israelite community based out of Israel. And they built their community based on peace and health and all these positive connection to the earth type of building. And from there, we all wanted to know, why would someone name a movie about magic prestige? And when you look up the word and the definition in and of itself, as we use it today, still talks about it being higher value placed on something based on a perception of it being more valuable, right? So we hold it in high regard based on this perception. When you hit the origin of the root of the definition, it was conjuring tricks and illusion.
Wow.
And so if you take that definition and put it towards our finer institutions, our prestigious universities, creating tricks and illusion, right? If you put it towards our wealthy neighborhoods, it's creating tricks and illusions, and how we say that this is, and try and control this narrative, right? Prestige is built into it. But on a deeper level that we don't really look at, and I'll hold up something else. If I had you look at this, that's covering me, you can't see what's going on behind that. And that's the magic show, right? It's not what you see in the magic show that tricks us. It's what you don't see. And you go, wow, how did that happen? Right. So when you start looking at our prestigious systems of finance, of education, so much that we're not taught is truth, right? We don't learn about any other cultures. We only learn about our own culture. And we're taught that this is the greatest place on earth. Well, how do we even know? Because we haven't even learned about something else, right? So you're developing this arrogance about our being great. We pledge our allegiance to the flag without any, thought about that or whatnot. We play our national anthem every chance we get when there's large crowds, especially attached to sporting events. So we are the greatest. We're the freest. We're the this. We're the that. And we don't learn about other cultures. So there's a level of ignorance that then starts to feed in from our media sources, keeping us very limited to what they teach us. Our education, keeping us limited. We don't learn about other cultures. And you start to develop this arrogance and ignorance that comes from this level of trickery and illusion. And we don't learn how to just interact and be curious about other cultures and just enjoy learning about and experiencing something different. It's now, you add that to the competition. And if you don't agree with me, now we're enemies instead of, oh my goodness, there's so many other angles we could go at that don't make us compete.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see that even in our attitudes when we're traveling abroad. I can't remember where I was. I think I was in Italy, in Rome, and I heard somebody just insisting that the person they talked to who lived there speak English,
Yeah.
Like, you're in their country.
Right.
And Italian, our language is based on Italian, and the Latin languages, their language is far more, if you're talking about old and treasured and valued, their language is far more than what we've come up with here, this hybridization of many languages. And yet you think someone in their own country, in their own home, should accommodate you because you're too lazy to open up Google Translate or whatever. It just blew me away.
Yeah. And two things about our language, right? So one, like you said, it's got all these different languages put together. But if you look at our dictionaries, we have so many, it's in the absolute, right? There's absolute languages, and then there's our language that is in absolute. And so because that, we have multiple definitions for every word. We have multiple words for every definition. And now the power to define becomes so important. But let's just take a look back to prestige and our language. Spelling sounds like you're under a spell. Cursive sounds like you're being cursed.
Oh,
Translation sounds like you're under a trance, right? Conversation, con is heavily used. Right? There's just so much trickery in even the way that we even describe our own language that we don't even understand it. It's sort of built into the cake, and so much manipulation goes on that, and going back to winning, that it doesn't make me have to be honorable if I can trick you into buying my products, right? If I can tell you that Fruit Loops is full of vitamin D and riboflavin, and that's good for you, it doesn't matter that it's full of artificial flavors and artificial colors
sugar.
Yeah, processed sugars and all these things that hurt you, because I'm telling you is some other trickery type of thing. And that's part of the prestige, part of the magic show. I just told you about vitamin C is in it. Okay. But there's also tons of harmful things that you're not telling me.
That you don't see.
Right. Our politicians speak in one-liners. Why? Because they can get away with that. But there's so much more that they're not telling us that they would be doing. Right. So there's just so much, which is why we're in this place of confusion and not able to trust our leaders and whatnot. I mean, this is where we are, and it's a built-in response to how things have been set up and structured in our approach.
And as we're speaking, we're in the middle of a really big campaign for presidency. And you're right. I just watched one of the candidates speaking, and it's all about the one-liners and the soundbite, really more about how can I get this to go viral than it is how can I really inform and educate people, and not even answering the questions that they're asked, but it's done so often that we don't even notice anymore that, that was a really nice answer, but it had nothing to do with what they were actually asked. So we're talking about prestige. You got me looking at things very differently now in culture, which makes me think, now that we have introduced the concept of cancel culture, that could take on a really different meaning than the way in which I've thought of it. How does define cancel culture as it relates to your mission and what you think about it?
So canceling is part of this competitive process, right? Rather than sharing the space with each other. If I can cancel you out, that's like a privilege that we don't like to really acknowledge as white privilege here, because that is something built into the cake of. And so one, let's just say from a physical nature, canceling, it happens when you develop weaponry of mass destruction, guns or whatever. I'm canceling your life if I'm doing that, right? And if you look at where the idea of these guns and these level of weaponry come from, it stems from European culture. So that's one level of canceling. On the other side, it's deciding that we're not going to teach you about Black history. We're not going to teach the truth about our own history. We're going to cancel these ideas from even circulating. And then on the left side, if it's often thought of as cancel culture, when you don't agree with my way of saying something, or you said something wrong, rather than say, how do we work through this and try and find some level of connection, we'll just cancel you so that you don't get a chance to speak anymore because you were wrong. Well, might have been wrong because you might have been raised a certain way to believe a certain thing. You've not experienced these things. We've lived in this world of prestige. We don't even know what we don't know. And so rather than working through issues, it's easiest to just go, nope, cancel. And what happens on both sides is we develop a less mature emotional state because we can't work through something.